In 1902, in the dusty streets of Tianjin, China, a boy named Eric Henry Liddell was born to Scottish missionary parents. His father, James, was a congregational minister who had given his life to serving the Chinese people. Eric's first words were not in English, they were in Mandarin. At the age of 5, Eric was sent to boarding school in England, a common but brutal tradition for missionary children. Separated from his parents by thousands of miles, the small boy from China found himself alone in the cold, grey halls of Eltham College in London. He wouldn't see his mother and father again for years. But Eric Liddell was no ordinary boy. On the playing fields of Eltham, something extraordinary revealed itself. He could run. Not just run, he could fly. By the time he reached the University of Edinburgh, Eric Liddell was the fastest man in Scotland. The newspapers gave him a name, the Flying Scotsman. All of Scotland fell in love with him. He won the 100-yard dash at the British Championships. He was unbeatable in the short sprints. Crowds packed stadiums just to watch him run, with his head thrown back, his arms pumping wildly, and that unmistakable grin that made him look like a man who was having the time of his life. In 1924, Eric Liddell was selected to represent Great Britain at the Paris Olympics. The 100 meters was his event, his best distance, his surest path to gold. All of Britain expected him to win. But months before the Games, the schedule was published. The 100-meter heats were on a Sunday. Eric Liddell refused to run, not because he didn't want to, not because he was injured, because it was the Lord's day, and he believed the Sabbath was not his to give away. The British Olympic Committee was furious. The press called him a traitor. The Prince of Wales himself pressured him to reconsider. Eric simply shook his head. "I'm not running." The mockery was savage. Cartoons in British newspapers painted him as a fool, a fanatic, a disgrace to his country. His own teammates questioned his loyalty. But Eric carried a quiet certainty that no headline could shake. He later said, "I believe God made me for a purpose, for China, but He also made me fast, and when I run, I feel His pleasure." With the 100 meters behind him, Eric entered the 400 meters, a distance he had barely trained for. No one gave him a chance. The 400 was not a sprinter's race. It required endurance, strategy, pacing, none of which were Eric Liddell's strengths. The world had already written him off. On July 11th, 1924, Eric Liddell crouched into the starting blocks for the 400-meter final at the Stade Colombes in Paris. Just before the race, a masseur handed him a folded note. Eric opened it. Inside, written in neat script, were the words, "He that honors me, I will honor." 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 30. The gun fired, and Eric Liddell did something no trained 400-meter runner would ever do. He sprinted from the start, full speed, as if he were running the 100 meters. The commentators were stunned. "He's going out too fast. He'll burn out before the final straight." But Eric Liddell didn't burn out. He ran the entire 400 meters as if something beyond his body was carrying him. Down the final straight, with his head thrown back and his mouth open wide, he crossed the finish line 5 meters ahead of the silver medalist. His time, 47.6 seconds, a world record. The stadium erupted. The man who wouldn't run on Sunday had just run the race of his life. Eric Liddell was now the most famous athlete in the British Empire. He could have had anything: endorsements, lecture tours, a comfortable life in Scotland. Instead, in 1925, just 1 year after his Olympic gold, Eric Liddell boarded a ship for China. He was going home. In Tianjin, Eric became a teacher at the Anglo-Chinese College. He taught science and sports. He organized rugby matches and led Bible studies. He married Florence Mackenzie, a Canadian missionary's daughter, and they had 3 girls. The Olympic champion lived a quiet life, pouring himself into students who had never heard of the 400 meters. When Japan invaded China in 1937, the world around Eric Liddell collapsed into chaos. Bombs fell on Chinese cities, refugees flooded the countryside, friends urged him to take his family to safety. Eric sent Florence and the girls to Canada in 1941. He stayed behind. "The people here need me," he said. He would never see his family again. In March 1943, the Japanese military rounded up all enemy nationals in northern China and marched them to Weihsien internment camp, a former Presbyterian mission compound surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers. 1,800 prisoners were crammed inside. Among them was Eric Liddell. In the camp, Eric Liddell became the most beloved man behind the wire. He organized games and races for the children, making them laugh when there was nothing to laugh about. He tutored teenagers in math and science. He held worship services in the open air. He gave away his food to those weaker than himself. Uncle Eric, the children called him. But privately, Eric was dying. Terrible headaches struck without warning. He stumbled. He lost his balance. A brain tumor was growing inside his skull, and there was no medicine, no surgery, no way out. He told no one. He kept teaching. He kept serving. He kept giving his rations to others, even as his own body was consuming itself. On February 21st, 1945, Eric Liddell collapsed in the camp. A nurse held his hand as his breathing slowed. His last words, spoken barely above a whisper, were, "It's complete surrender." He was 43 years old. Liberation came 5 months later. In 1981, the film Chariots of Fire told the world the story of the man who wouldn't run on Sunday. It won the Academy Award for Best Picture. But the film ended with the Olympic gold. It never showed what Eric Liddell did next. The 20 years he gave to China. The children he carried on his shoulders in a prison camp. The food he placed in hungrier hands than his own. And the final, whispered surrender of a man who had already given everything.